Last week we saw the first plague where Moses and Aaron, through the Lord's power, turned the Nile and all the river into blood. And although Pharaoh didn't respond and let the people go, the first plague was not in vain. Or I should say, maybe not in veins. Blood, veins. Okay. But this is a new plague. Sermon entitled Signs of Sovereignty, plague number 2. And Kate won the subtitle contest this week. Subtitled, All You Can Eat Frog Legs. Linz hates frogs. She grew up and they moved out into the country, and when you're out in the country, you're surrounded by all kinds of woods. You got to beat the woods back continually. And she was a little girl, and out on her patio, she was running around, stepped on a frog on barefoot, and squished it. And ever since then, she's hated frogs. But really, it doesn't take much to hate frogs. They're slimy and stinky and ew, they're just gross. And you can imagine a plague of them. Well, you don't even have to imagine. It's in our scriptures. Exodus 8, 1 through 15. Exodus 8, 1 through 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go in to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm or teem with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the house of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and all your servants. And the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts, and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, Plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, Be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs may be cut off from you and your houses may be left only in the Nile. And he said, Tomorrow. Moses said, Be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your houses and your servants and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs, as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. And they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Here's our main idea for today. The Lord alone is God. He is the true source of new life. The Lord alone is God. He is the true source of new life. From a modern perspective, this second plague seems almost comical. It's not life-threatening. It's not even debilitating. And yet, if you or I had to deal with this, just imagine frogs everywhere. You throw open your shower curtain and there's frogs climbing on the shower. You get your shoes out and slip your foot into a shoe and there's something slimy in there. It's a frog. your microwave. You open your microwave to cook your morning porridge, and there's frogs. You throw back your covers to get into bed, there's frogs. I mean, that would get your attention. But that's not the whole story. Again, for us to have a richer appreciation for the lesson of this play, we need to know what the frog represented in ancient Egypt. Frogs were, at least for a period of time, sacred animals. You weren't allowed to kill frogs. And under normal situations, the croaking of frogs was considered a blessing. The Egyptian god Heket was the god of fertility and childbirth, and even came to be associated with resurrection. And the croaking of frogs in Egypt was a literal sign that let the people know that the high water season was ending, and all those rich soil deposits that were left in the fields were deposited in the land in the Nile Delta. And it was time to plant, or drawing close to time to plant. So that cacophony of croaking frogs promised another buster crop for Egypt. It was about fertility. Fertility. And of course, in the ancient world, there wasn't much of a separation between the sacred and the secular. Every practical matter in life had a spiritual counterpart. And from an Egyptian perspective, the spiritual source of fertile land and even fertile wombs was this god, Heket. At least he had a major role in this. And how was the god Heket visually represented? It was a frog. A frog. They were sacred, almost like you would see in India with cows, or some other indigenous land where they hold an animal sacred. So normally the croaking of frogs was a good thing. It was a sign that the gods were blessing Egypt with fertile soil and fertile wombs. But this was beyond. This was out of control. This was too much of a good thing. It would be like for us a plague of Easter bunnies. Now you may not know that the Easter bunny is kind of a leftover image of pagan religion back in Europe days. And the bunny represents fertility because they spread like wildfire. I mean, everywhere. They're just fertile, abundant creatures. If you can imagine Hannibal being struck with a plague of bunnies, as silly as that is, there would be a little bit of the symbolism that we have here. So what does all that mean? Frogs and bunnies and blood. It seems really archaic to us, distant. But God is teaching Israel, and He's teaching in Egypt that He alone is God. That's the lesson in these plays. Yahweh, the Lord, Jehovah, alone is God. He alone is worthy of worship. That's the broad meaning for all of these plagues. But specifically, though, I think we can zoom in and narrow down that idea to also say this as well, that Yahweh is the source of new life. New life in nature, in the spring when it's time to plant. New life in the womb. He opens the barren womb. New life after death. He is the real God of resurrection. He's not just a petty God that rules over some little things of life, like the pagans believed. He is the one true God of all. This is another sign of sovereignty. He is Lord of all life, new life. The Lord alone is God. He is the true source of new life. And so I want to walk through these verses, and we don't really have time for me to cover them verse by verse, but I want to give you a summary and point out some good details, and then make some applications before we celebrate the Lord's Supper today. And I begin by examining this plague predicted, which is verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. In these first 4 verses, the Lord again instructs Moses to go and to confront Pharaoh, this man who is the mightiest king of the ancient world. And this time there's a warning. This time there's a threat. If you don't let the people go, then I will plague Egypt with frogs. And you'll notice that now this is escalated so that it goes beyond the water supply, beyond the Nile River. This is going to extend into Pharaoh's palace. Even Pharaoh himself is going to be bothered by this. He might have experienced a minor inconvenience with trying to dig up water or have a servant dig up water for him, and he wasn't able to bathe in the Nile like he'd like to, but this is going to get personal. And some have theorized that this frog thing could have been explained naturally. The Nile being toxic because of whatever had happened, an algae bloom or what have you. And then the frogs escaped to the land, but because they had already been exposed to anthrax or whatever the disease was, then they would die. And that sounds very good. But what we have here described is much bigger than that. Chapter 7, verse 25 has told us that the Nile had already returned to normal. And Moses describes this as the land teeming and swarming with frogs. This isn't a normal number of frogs that have just escaped to the land. This is a superabundance of frogs. So much so that the whole land is filled with them. Nobody is exempt, except for Israel, presumably. So they end up everywhere. Places they wouldn't normally go, even if they were just escaping to the land. Shows us that this is a natural phenomenon. This is a prophetic threat that Moses has made. If you don't relent, Pharaoh, this is what's going to happen. Slimy, unsanitary, croaking, hopping, crawling, clinging frogs everywhere. And that's exactly what happens. Verses 5 through 7, the plague applied. This is exactly what transpires. Moses directs Aaron, again acting as a prophetic priest, to stretch out his hands with the staff and to afflict Egypt with this plague. And Aaron obeys, and the Lord follows through with this threat. And in this one, there's not an interaction between Moses and Pharaoh recorded. It's just understood. But Pharaoh has heard the threat but was uncompliant. And although Moses and Aaron are actors, it is really the Lord who is doing this. Therefore, here comes the frogs. Slimy, unsanitary, croaking, hopping, crawling, clinging frogs everywhere. But then again, notice verse 7. The Egyptian magicians were able to do the same thing by their secret arts. And what does that mean? Like I said last week about the water being turned to blood, it's either by trickery, sleight of hand, or substitution magic, or by perhaps even occultic witchcraft, shamanism. They imitate this miracle on a small scale. They too call up frogs. And you can imagine how this could be done. It wouldn't have to be done on a wide scale like Moses had done, only enough to convince Pharaoh. So a little smoke and mirrors, or do a box switcheroo, or pull a frog out of your turban, and Pharaoh has evidence not to let the people go. And so that's what happens. But the episode is not over. There's an interesting dialogue after the fact, tagged on the end of this plague. And so let's look at that now. Verses 8 through 15, what I call the plague removed. The plague removed. Pharaoh is unconvinced. He's not going to let the people go, but he's bothered enough that he wants relief. So Pharaoh wants to make a deal. Make a deal. Here's the deal. Moses, you plead to the Lord for me. Have him get rid of all these stinking frogs, and then I'll give you all permission to go on this little spiritual retreat you want to do. And so Moses replies, okay, tell me when. When? Say when. And Pharaoh says, tomorrow. Hop to it. Tomorrow. Frogs, hop. You guys just aren't enough fun today. Okay, but he says, says tomorrow. And there's a little bit of confusion about whether he's going to intercede tomorrow or whether it means the frogs are going to be removed tomorrow. The dialogue there is a little bit hard to translate. But notice verse 10. It's important. Be it as you say, Moses says, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. That is an important purpose statement. And that shows up at least 3 more times during these 10 plagues. Why is Moses going to pray to remove the frogs at a specific time? So that Pharaoh will know that there is no God like the Lord. The Lord alone is God. He is the true source of new life. It's to reveal God to Pharaoh. So Moses does what he said he's going to do. He intercedes, this is stunning, he intercedes on behalf of Pharaoh in Egypt that the frogs would be removed. Don't gloss over that. Moses intercedes on behalf of his enemy. That sounds rather New Testament, doesn't it? Sounds kind of like Jesus a little bit. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing. Love your enemies. Pray for them, that you may be called sons of Israel. And amazingly, the Lord did according to the word of Moses. God responds to Moses' intercession and relents. The frogs died. Everywhere they were, the frogs croaked. So much so, in fact, that the Egyptians gathered them together in great big piles, and the land stunk. I mean, can you just imagine? This is the second time that Egypt is described as having a foul odor. A foul odor was symbolic of what was transpiring. Egypt stinks. Egypt stinks to God. Egypt stinks to Moses. Egypt stinks to Israel. Egypt stinks even to the Egyptians. And this is all because of Pharaoh's stubbornness, his resistance to God's purposes. This whole place stinks with the rotting flesh of dead frogs. It's more comic relief than actual relief. But God did answer Moses' prayer. So, does Pharaoh let the people go per his agreement? No, he does not. Verse 15, he says, when they got relief, he hardened his heart, would not listen, just as the Lord said. Pharaoh reneges on his contract. And of course, God's not surprised, and Moses shouldn't be surprised, because the Lord told Moses that this is going to happen. This boxing match, this spiritual sparring competition, is going to go for 8 more rounds. And so the plague is over. Number 2 is done. So what can we learn from this tale today? I mean, 3,500 years or so removed, depending on how you date the Exodus. What can we learn today? Well, I want to point you again to the main idea. The Lord alone is God. He is the true source of new life. Hopefully you're believing that, and resting in that, and living that practically in your life. But I've discerned a few other ideas here that I think are appropriate. Number 1, here's an application for you. God may make people uncomfortable in order to open their eyes. God may make you or me an unbeliever. He may make people in general uncomfortable in order to open their eyes. Especially in our affluent Western American culture, we give comfort and convenience a high priority. But God's not nearly as concerned about these things as we are. In fact, I've found personally that one of the ways God works, either to get our attention or to shake us up, to open our eyes, is to remove our comforts, to remove conveniences that we might be shaken up enough to see things from His perspective, to draw near to Him, to seek Him out, to get so uncomfortable with where we are that we seek relief from Him. So how has God been making you uncomfortable today, lately? How has God been inconveniencing you lately? What is He trying to teach you by that today? From God's perspective, momentary discomfort is worth the eternal trade-off of righteousness. From God's perspective, momentary discomfort is worth the eternal trade-off of righteousness. Sometimes God not only allows, but specifically sends slimy, croaking, hopping, clinging frogs, metaphorically speaking, into our lives as bad-tasting medicine, so that we would be challenged in our faith, or that we might be rebuked in our sin, that we might be disciplined and drawn back to Him, or to simply test us to see if our faith is genuine so that the world may see or that we might see. God might make us uncomfortable in order to open our eyes. Secondly, I would encourage you to be careful. Promises made under duress are quickly forgotten once relief comes. Be careful in your faith. Promises made under duress are quickly forgotten once relief comes. I had a buddy in college, just out of high school, that was in a horrific car accident. Speeding and flipped his car over and over and over down the interstate, didn't have a seatbelt on, and miraculously walked away from it with just a few scratches. And the first thing he told me when I saw him, I remember it vividly, he said, "I am a new man, Justin. I have a new lease on life. I'm going to stop doing all that bad stuff. And I'm going to start doing all that good stuff. I'm going to go back to church. I'm going to change who I am because I know I could be dead. I should be dead, what I went through." Let me tell you, that commitment lasted 3 days. 3 days. That weekend, he was right back to cussing and drinking and chasing women and doing everything that he was doing before. And, you know, deathbed conversions are possible. After all, the thief on the cross is a legitimate deathbed conversion. It was a true promise from Jesus. But we got to be careful because our hearts are suspect, especially under pressure. You can make a sincere commitment when things are, God help me, God save me, God bring me relief, I'll do anything. But when that relief comes, you go right back to default. And here's another just tag on that. If you make a vow, a promise, especially to the Lord, the Bible says that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Don't be like Pharaoh. If you promise it, Christian, deliver. Deliver. In your parenting, in your marriage, in your job, in your church, everywhere. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything less is sin. Don't be like Pharaoh in that regard. And last and finally, I think it's good for us to intercede that unbelievers may know that there is no one like our God. Just like Moses. Follow Moses' good example. It's good to intercede that unbelievers may know that there is no one like our God. Isn't it an amazing thing that Moses prays, he pleads, he intercedes on Pharaoh's behalf just about the frogs? And I know he wasn't praying for his soul in a spiritual sense, in the sense of conversion, but that is a broader New Testament application. Are you praying for unbelievers in your life? Your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors? Are you interceding for them? What about your enemies? Those who are persecuting you or hating you because of your faith. Matthew 5, that's Jesus' Sermon on the Mount Christianity. It says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Pray for their blessing, pray for their provision, their health and well-being, but more importantly, pray for their souls. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing, even from the cross. Like Moses prayed, that they may know that there is no one like our God. You know, the best thing that can happen to your enemies is not that they would be destroyed, it's that they would be converted for the glory of God and the good of mankind. It's good to intercede for unbelievers, that they may know that there is no one like our God. So the first plague, the The Egyptian god of the Nile, the gods of the Nile were humiliated. Osiris, for example. They were humiliated. We can add another god to that list today, Heket. The Lord Yahweh is showing his superiority, his sovereignty over Egypt and their false religious system. And this is important for the whole world, not just Egypt, especially Israel, because Israel's been living there so long that they are practically Egyptians. Those gods still mattered something to them. And the Lord needed to show them that all these Egyptian gods were nothing. That seems distant and irrelevant to us, but nothing could be further from the truth. Because we worship the same Lord today. He's just as sovereign today as he was back then. All the little petty idols and gods that we tend to worship in life need to be humiliated too. And like I warned last week, what's the biggest false god we have to deal with in our lives? It's ourselves. It's ourselves. That's a god we must daily knock off the altar. Because if we're not careful, even our religion can easily become about me, about you, about what I want and how I want it, what makes me comfortable, what makes me happy. But it's not about that. It's about God. Yahweh alone is God. He alone is worthy of worship. He is the true source of satisfying, eternal, and abundant new life. Let's pray, close, and then we'll prepare for the Lord's Supper.